The story opens with a heavy thought settling in his mind, as he reflects on the strange turn of fate that brings him to this moment. He only intends to spend time like usual playing his game, but that intention connects directly to a memory where he declares something serious. He makes it clear to everyone that their rule over the continent has ended, and because of that, they must move forward again and reclaim their place on this land. He does not present it as a desire for conflict, yet he understands that following him will still lead to loss of life. This makes him acknowledge that what lies ahead is not a game, but a real war. Even with that awareness, he pushes forward and urges everyone to take up weapons, defend themselves, and carve a path into the future because survival in this world leaves them with no other choice. He accepts that all of this begins with his own will, and as he reaches out, he sets the war in motion. That intense moment fades into his normal routine, which explains why he now feels drained again after another day of work. Because his job gives him no sense of fulfillment, he naturally turns to the only thing that does, which is his time at night. However, the moment he looks toward his door, something feels off. The change in his surroundings makes him realize that what should have been familiar no longer matches what he remembers. Since he clearly recalls being in his room just moments ago, the sudden shift leaves him unable to recognize where he is. This confusion grows when he checks his hands and realizes the controller he expects to be holding is missing. That absence makes him question everything further, and when he looks at what he is wearing, he assumes it is armor. Despite its heavy appearance, it feels light, and the presence of a cape makes the situation even more unreal. Because nothing matches his expectations anymore, he tries to make sense of it by observing the surroundings more carefully. That effort leads to a realization that the place is not just familiar, but extremely familiar. As he approaches the throne and examines it, the connection becomes clear. The setting matches the base screen of Legions, the strategy simulation game he has spent years playing. This recognition explains why everything feels so precise, as he recalls how the game works. Players begin by choosing a nation and take on the role of a ruler, aiming to unify the continent through military strength. Progress in the game depends on managing internal affairs, diplomacy, and warfare effectively. Because he has invested so much time into it, his accumulated knowledge naturally starts guiding his thoughts. That same knowledge reminds him that the game begins with 5 nations. 4 come with established main characters, while the 5th, known as the White Nation, requires players to create everything from scratch. Choosing it means starting with weak allies surrounded by stronger nations, while still aiming for total domination. Since the throne room marks the starting point of the White Nation, he immediately understands the seriousness of his situation. Before he can process it fully, a girl's voice interrupts, reacting to the disturbance in the chamber. Her sudden appearance catches his attention, and although he recognizes her beauty, her presence feels suspicious. At the same time, something about her seems familiar. When he notices her anger, the situation becomes tense, but it shifts quickly when she suddenly collapses. Her condition makes him focus on her safety, but instead of responding normally, she clings to him and breaks into tears. She addresses him as Fells and expresses that his return has been long awaited. Her reaction confuses him, which leads him to study her words more carefully. As he tries to confirm what she means, she firmly identifies him as Lord Fells. That claim shocks him, but her certainty leaves no room for doubt. Because of that, he recalls that Fells is the name he gave to his main character in the game. Even though he insists that he is just an overworked gamer, she rejects that idea completely. To prove her point, she presents a mirror and urges him to look. When he finally sees his reflection, the evidence becomes undeniable. His appearance matches the character he created. This, combined with the surroundings, leads him to a clear conclusion that he is now inside the game world itself. That realization shifts his fear into excitement, since his deep understanding of the game gives him confidence. The thought of leaving behind his exhausting real life strengthens his decision to accept this situation as a new beginning. When he looks at the girl again and confirms her identity as Reincarnated, her response reinforces her loyalty as his servant. He recognizes her as a character he personally designed, someone he frequently used during gameplay. Seeing her in front of him makes the situation feel even more real, especially since she appears more vivid than he ever imagined. As the Knight Commander, her presence confirms that this world follows the structure he knows. This realization leads him to question the timeline, since Reincarnated appears unchanged, which suggests this may not be the exact starting point of the game. Before he can explore that further, she requests permission to gather everyone in the audience chamber to celebrate his return. The idea of facing everyone makes him uneasy, but his curiosity grows stronger than his fear. Because he wants to understand his situation fully, he agrees to meet them. Once everyone gathers and he takes his place on the throne, the pressure becomes overwhelming. His identity as a normal gamer contrasts sharply with the expectations placed on him. Despite that, he observes the crowd and notices their genuine happiness. Leon Feria's words about his return being a blessing explain their reactions, as they all reaffirm their loyalty to him as their supreme king. This pushes him to ask a few important questions to understand the current state of the world. From Leon Feria's answers, he learns that 8 years have passed since the unification era began, and that the continent remains under complete control after defeating the evil god's army. His title as Overlord confirms that he is already at the peak of power. This information excites him, since it means he has reached a stage in the game where resources and military strength should be at their highest. However, recalling details from the game also reveals something concerning. After completing the Supreme King route, the main character remains alone in the Divine Realm. This suggests that his return now marks a major shift. Even so, he decides to embrace the situation and move forward confidently. With that mindset, he addresses everyone and reaffirms his role as their ruler. He commits to standing with them again and protecting their future, reinforcing their unity under his command. As they move to another chamber for further discussion, the atmosphere becomes more formal. He meets key figures he recognizes as characters he created, each fulfilling their roles perfectly. Their presence confirms that this world truly reflects the game he once controlled. He expresses appreciation for their efforts in maintaining everything during his absence, and their responses show deep respect and loyalty toward him. The conversation then shifts when a suggestion is made to celebrate his return publicly. This leads to unexpected information that disrupts the situation. Reports reveal that beyond the castle there is no city, no people, and nothing but empty plains. This directly contradicts everything he expects from a fully unified continent. Because of this, his confidence begins to shake. What he believed would be a comfortable continuation of his completed game now turns into uncertainty. His experience tells him that something is wrong, and instead of enjoying a finished world, he realizes he is stepping into something entirely unknown. The moment he steps outside, the view around the castle immediately gives him a clear sense that something is seriously wrong. The land stretches endlessly as empty grassland, and because he knows the game so well, he understands that this kind of setting should not exist here. That mismatch pushes him to act without hesitation. Since guessing will not help, he decides he needs to confirm everything himself. He rises quickly and makes it clear that even though he does not yet understand the situation, he intends to see it directly. Because of that decision, he orders Philia to guide him to the top of the castle walls. She responds immediately, which keeps things moving without delay. At the same time, he issues further instructions to secure the castle. Everyone outside is called back, the gates are shut, and the entire fortress is put on alert. This chain of commands reflects his instinct to prepare for danger, even without full information. As they move through the castle, his thoughts begin organizing the situation. Since this world should match the post-clear state of legions, the current abnormality forces him to consider possible explanations. He leans toward the idea of a system error or some unknown feature, because that is the only way his knowledge can still make sense of what he is seeing. When he reaches the top of the walls and looks out, the reality in front of him removes any remaining doubt. There is no city, no buildings, and no signs of life anywhere. Because of that, the earlier report becomes fully confirmed. Philia explains that it is not a case of destruction but something stranger, as if the town had never existed at all. She also points out that even the terrain itself has changed compared to the previous day. This detail deepens the problem since it means the world itself has been altered, not just its inhabitants. Standing there, he processes everything carefully. The absence of monsters suggests there is no immediate threat, which gives him a small window to think. Because there is no visible danger, his focus shifts from survival to understanding. That leads him to consider what his next move should be. At that moment, someone calls out to him, which breaks his train of thought. When he turns, he sees Yuru, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Her sudden appearance catches him off guard, but her presence quickly reminds him of her true role. In this world, diplomacy does not function in a normal way. Instead, her position revolves around scouting, intelligence gathering, and assassination. Because of that, she operates as a leader of covert agents rather than a traditional diplomat. This understanding immediately highlights her importance in the current situation. Recognizing that, he assigns her a clear task. Since information is now the most critical need, he instructs her to carry out reconnaissance. He emphasizes that gathering information takes priority and that combat should be avoided unless absolutely necessary. This decision reflects his awareness that acting without knowledge could lead to unnecessary risk. Yuru accepts the order without hesitation and leaves at once, disappearing with remarkable stealth. Watching her vanish reinforces how different this world is from his previous life. As someone who used to live as an ordinary civilian, witnessing such abilities makes the gap between his past and present even more obvious. After that, he shifts his attention to another key factor he needs to confirm. He asks Philia about the status of their magic stone reserves. Her inability to provide an answer reveals a gap in his current understanding, which makes him realize how much he still needs to check himself. This leads him to reflect on the importance of magic stones within the system he knows. Because everything in Legions depends on them. They form the foundation of the entire structure. From buying items to casting magic, from creating weapons to maintaining facilities, every function relies on this single resource. Troop summoning and character growth also depend on it, which means controlling magic stones is essential for maintaining power. That realization makes it clear that without knowing their reserves, he cannot fully assess his current strength. At that point, Ilmet steps forward to provide a report, which signals that the process of gathering the missing information has already begun. Fels turns to Arendor and focuses on the army first, since military readiness is the most immediate concern. Arendor confirms that the forces are fully prepared and can move at any time, which reassures him for the moment. However, that confidence quickly comes with a limitation. Because magic stones cannot be replenished, Arendor explains that summoning additional troops should be avoided. This forces Fels to accept that even with a strong army, their resources place a clear restriction on how they can act. Because of that, Fels concludes that every decision now depends on the situation, and this naturally extends to magic usage as well. Camilla reacts to this point, explaining that limiting magic will heavily weaken the magic core. Her concern highlights how dependent their overall strength is on magic. Fels acknowledges this but points out that without a source of magic stones, there is no alternative. Even though she understands the logic, Camilla pushes back emotionally and insists that magic use cannot simply be restricted so harshly. Her reaction leads to a clearer condition being set. If they can secure a source that produces magic stones, then the problem would be solved. This shifts the discussion toward resource acquisition as the main priority. Aisha then brings up another issue. She explains that while general magic can be limited, holy magic used for healing cannot be treated the same way. Since healing is essential for both combat and defense, restricting it completely would create serious risks. Arendor agrees with her, reinforcing that certain types of magic are too important to cut off. Because of these points, Fels organizes his thoughts and aligns them with what was said earlier. Securing magic stones becomes the highest priority, as it directly affects every other decision. At the same time, he considers the possibility of moving the army without relying on magic, but that idea immediately runs into the same limitation. No matter how large their current reserves are, they remain finite, and once they run out, there will be no backup. This makes preparation even more critical. Kirk steps in and suggests a balanced approach. For now, they should conserve magic stones while maintaining full alert status. At the same time, they should wait for information from their scouts before making any major moves. This plan brings structure to the situation, and everyone looks toward Fels for approval. He agrees, confirming that this approach is the best option for now. Despite that, Kirk becomes frustrated, as the situation contrasts sharply with what he expected. Instead of celebrating Fels' return, they are dealing with uncertainty and crisis. His emotions briefly get the better of him, but he quickly regains control and apologizes. Fels does not dwell on it, and instead shifts the focus forward. He then gives a new order to Otonoha, telling her to prepare an airship for immediate use. When she asks how many are needed, he specifies that one will be enough. Since they are still waiting for information, he plans to use the airship to survey the surroundings from above. This idea surprises her, as she initially views airships only as transportation. However, his approach reveals a more practical use, which she acknowledges with respect. From this reaction, Fels realizes something important. The characters in this world follow the logic of the game closely and do not naturally think beyond their assigned roles. This means he can take advantage of his broader perspective to find solutions they would not consider. With the meeting effectively concluded, his attention shifts inward. Since he cannot rely only on knowledge, he needs to confirm his own abilities. Because of that, he decides to head to the training grounds. Before leaving, he asks Lianferia to spar with him, as he wants to test several things directly. She agrees immediately, though the sudden request catches her off guard. Camilla approaches with a teasing tone, questioning why only Lanefaria is chosen. This makes him reconsider, and he realizes that having a magic expert present would be useful as well. Because of that, he invites Camilla to join them, explaining that there are things he wants to learn from her. She accepts, though the mood around them shifts unexpectedly. Both of them suddenly kneel, reacting in a way he did not intend. Their misunderstanding creates an awkward moment, and he quickly clarifies that his request is only about training. Once the confusion clears, he regains control of the situation and refocuses on his goal. He explains that due to his time in the divine realm, parts of his memory feel unclear. Because of that, he needs to confirm whether his body functions properly and whether he can still use magic. To do this, he asks for their cooperation. Both of them agree, and the focus shifts entirely to testing his abilities. He decides to begin with magic and asks Camilla to guide him. She starts by explaining the 5 basic types, which include single-target attacks, defensive barriers, wide-area attacks, and other fundamental forms. She demonstrates how magic works, showing that it can be activated either through spoken words or mental focus, as long as sufficient power is present. As he listens, his prior knowledge connects everything together. He recalls the different attributes such as fire, lightning, dark, and illusion, along with the broader system that includes 10 total attributes. Each attribute follows specific rules, with some focused on attack while others handle healing or support. Understanding the theory leads him to act. Since magic requires stored power, which depends on magic stones, he recognizes the importance of using it carefully. Even so, practice becomes necessary. Following Camilla's suggestion, he decides to test it directly. He raises his hand and focuses, applying what he knows to create a precise flame arrow. The spell forms smoothly and launches exactly as intended. The result confirms that his abilities remain intact, and the accuracy of the attack surprises both of them. Camilla acknowledges that the execution is flawless, which proves that his experience and control carry over perfectly into this world. Fells watches the flame arrow land perfectly, and that success immediately shifts his mood. Because the spell works exactly as he intends, he realizes he can truly use magic in this world. That realization excites him, and the fact that magic stones are not consumed in the training grounds removes any pressure. Since there is no cost here, he continues practicing freely without worrying about his reserves. This freedom leads his thoughts toward growth. He starts considering character development and wonders if it is possible to master every attribute. That idea quickly clashes with reality because outside the training grounds, magic stones are still limited. As a result, he pulls himself back and reminds himself to stay cautious. Camilla notices his ability and brings up an important point. She recalls that he is originally a 4-attribute user and expresses how impressive that already is. Her reaction reflects how unusual his current performance looks. At the same time, she herself is a character designed to handle all 10 attributes, which places her at the peak of magical capability. Because of that, her acknowledgement carries weight. Fells reflects briefly on the many settings and adjustments he once added without much thought. However, instead of getting distracted by that, he refocuses on his current goal. Confirming his own abilities takes priority over everything else. He then shifts from magic to physical combat. Since testing only one area is not enough, he decides to check his sword skills next. He turns to Lanefaria and relies on her assistance again. She prepares immediately, understanding what he intends. As he thinks it through, he assumes that sword skills should consume stamina instead of magic stones. To confirm this, he asks whether the activation process works the same way as magic. She explains that it does, especially in his case. With that confirmation, he proceeds without hesitation. He grips his sword and focuses, then releases a skill. The attack forms instantly and cuts the target cleanly in half. The result proves that the ability activates correctly, although the difference from magic makes it harder for him to feel the exact process. Lanefaria observes carefully and confirms that the skill has activated without any issues. This reassures him that his combat abilities are functioning properly. With both magic and sword skills working, he moves on to the next step. He decides that real testing requires direct combat. Because of that, he requests a one-on-one sparring match with Lanefaria, treating it as an instructional fight rather than a serious battle. She accepts immediately and prepares herself. The moment the match begins, she charges toward him without hesitation. He reacts by drawing his weapon and attacking, but something about her approach feels off. Instead of fighting like a typical swordsman, she uses a shield aggressively while advancing. This contradicts what he expects based on her role, which confuses him. As the fight continues, the gap between expectation and reality becomes clearer. He attempts another attack, but she blocks with precision and adjusts her movement smoothly. When he strikes again, she shifts her shield in a way that redirects his blade completely. The motion feels unnatural to him, as if his own body reacts faster than his thoughts can follow. That moment makes him realize that his body is acting on instinct, responding more efficiently than he consciously understands. This creates a strange disconnect, where his actions succeed, but his awareness struggles to keep up. The sparring ends, and he immediately checks on her condition. Since this is still training, he wants to ensure she is not hurt. She reassures him and acknowledges his strength, emphasizing that his abilities exceed expectations. Before the moment settles, Camilla steps in and interrupts the flow. She points out that he should not focus only on one opponent, and reminds him that it is now her turn. He accepts this without resistance, keeping the process moving. Later, the scene shifts back to the castle. Fels returns to the throne, and the focus moves from testing abilities to gathering information. Because the earlier uncertainty still remains, the report from Reconnaissance becomes crucial. When Yuru returns, he immediately asks for her findings. She reports that a village has been discovered with around 200 people and a low level of development. This information finally introduces the first clear sign of life outside the empty plains, giving him a new direction to consider. Fels reaches the village that Yuru has discovered, and the moment he sees it, his expectations shift. The place turns out smaller than he imagined, which makes him realize that what he knows from the game does not fully match reality. Because this is a different world, he also considers the possibility of a language barrier, which could make communication difficult. Before he moves forward, Linferia steps in and offers to handle the interaction with the villagers on his behalf. Her suggestion comes from caution, but he decides to take control himself. Since this is their first direct contact with this world, he believes it is better to experience it personally. Because of that, he explains that he will handle the conversation while the others remain alert and stay close. As he walks toward the village, his thoughts connect back to the earlier report. At first, the information about a small population matches what he knows from legions, but seeing it directly changes his perception. A village of around 200 people corresponds to the lowest rank in the game, which means even if a magic power collection device is installed, the output would remain limited. This reinforces the idea that resources will stay tight unless they expand. When he considers the distance and the current situation, he organizes his priorities clearly. Magic stones and food are important, but information comes first. Because he has already confirmed his own abilities, he feels confident enough to take this step himself. That decision surprises the others, since a ruler normally would not handle such tasks directly. However, his need to understand the situation outweighs that concern. Kirk prepares to object, but Fels clarifies that he will not go alone. This immediately shifts the reaction. Linferia insists on accompanying him, driven by her duty to protect him, while Camilla argues that magic offers better protection than swordsmanship. Their disagreement escalates slightly, which forces Arendor to step in and restore order. Ilmet tries to ease the tension with a light remark, but Fels stops the discussion and confirms that he has already decided who will go. Once the group sets out, the journey itself reveals something important. They cover the distance on foot in an incredibly short time, without rest. Because of this, Fels realizes that not only his own body, but also his subordinates possess abilities far beyond normal limits. When he observes Aisha closely, her calm state without any sign of exhaustion confirms this further. This leads him to conclude that his team is made up of exceptionally strong individuals. The group formation reflects his strategy. Kirk, Arendor, and Yuru remain at the castle, while Linferia, Camilla, and Aisha accompany him as protection. Each role aligns with their strengths, since Yuru focuses on stealth and intelligence, while Otonoha specializes in investigation. As they approach the village, he gives Otonoha a clear task. She needs to determine whether a magic power collection device can be installed and whether the village can produce magic stones. This step becomes just as important as gathering general information because it directly affects their future resources. She accepts the responsibility, and they proceed forward. Soon after, several villagers approach them. Their reaction shows urgency, as they assume the group has come in response to a request for help. This moment immediately confirms that communication is not an issue since they understand each other clearly. Linferia reacts to the villagers' casual tone, but Fels stops her, choosing a calmer approach. He keeps the situation under control and shifts the focus toward understanding the problem. An older man introduces himself as the village chief. From his words, Fels realizes that the villagers expected knights to arrive, which usually indicates trouble. Because of that, he adjusts his response carefully. Instead of confirming their role directly, he presents the group as travelers who happen to pass by. This keeps the situation flexible while still allowing him to gather information. The village chief, however, continues respectfully and expresses willingness to explain the issue. Fells senses tension from his own group behind him, which pushes him to maintain authority. He reassures the villagers that numbers are not a concern and hints that their strength is greater than it appears. This quickly changes the villagers' attitude and they respond with apologies. With the atmosphere settled, Fells directs the conversation toward the real issue. Since cooperation now benefits both sides, he encourages the chief to explain what is happening. At the same time, he thinks ahead, realizing that helping them could create an opportunity to gain their trust and possibly secure permission for installing a magic collection device. To proceed smoothly, he decides to limit the number of people involved in the discussion. He instructs Reincarnated and Otonoha to remain outside and continue their own observations without disturbing the villagers. This allows him to handle negotiations more effectively while the investigation continues in parallel. Once inside, he focuses entirely on the village chief. The explanation reveals that a goblin settlement has formed in the forest to the south. This immediately connects to his prior knowledge, since goblins are typically low-level enemies that multiply quickly. Even though no damage has occurred yet, the risk continues to grow over time. Because the threat has not fully developed, he looks deeper into how it was discovered. The chief explains that a hunter entered the forest to gather herbs and accidentally went too far inside. That mistake led to the discovery of the goblin settlement, and the hunter barely escaped. This suggests that the goblins reacted aggressively, even if their exact strength remains unclear. Fells processes this carefully. Since the hunter panicked and fled, the situation lacks precise information about the enemy's power. This uncertainty makes it difficult to judge the level of danger. However, waiting for outside forces while the threat grows could lead to unnecessary harm. Because of that, he forms a decision. Investigating the situation directly becomes the best option. If the goblins turn out to be manageable, he intends to deal with them immediately. The village chief expresses gratitude and begins to consider a reward, but Fells shifts the focus. Instead of payment, he requests two things. First, he wants detailed information about the surrounding area. Second, he hints that one of his companions will later explain another matter related to the village. Although he does not go into detail, he makes it clear that he is not seeking money or material reward. After settling the agreement, he quietly reflects on the difficulty of explaining complex systems like magic collection to ordinary villagers. He leaves that responsibility to Otonoha, trusting her to handle it properly. Just then, he contacts Yuru and gives her a direct order. She is instructed to locate the goblin settlement, but avoid engaging with it. Her quick response confirms that she understands the priority of gathering information first. The villagers react with surprise to this sudden coordination, but Fells explains that it is simply one of his subordinates handling the task. This reassurance strengthens their confidence in him. With the discussion complete, he stands and shifts his focus to the next objective. The negotiation phase is finished, which means the next step is clear. The investigation of the goblin settlement begins, and with that decision, he moves forward. As they move deeper into the forest, the ground begins to soften under their feet, which makes Fells warn everyone to stay careful while walking. Because the path becomes muddy, even simple movement requires attention. Reincarnated acknowledges this and stays close, while Otonoha continues guiding them forward without hesitation. Since they managed to locate the settlement area faster than expected, Fells connects this progress to Yuru's efficiency. That result reinforces his trust in her abilities as their intelligence specialist. While moving, his attention shifts briefly to Camilla. He notices her appearance and realizes that traveling like this is something he never had to consider in the game. Because of that, he wonders if her clothes might become a problem. She explains that she can fix it later using magic, which immediately shows him how practical magic is in everyday situations. At the same time, Otonoha notices his behavior and interprets it differently. She points out that he seems overly cautious, especially after earlier moments. Fells clarifies that this is not personal concern, but part of his effort to evaluate everyone's abilities. Since this world no longer follows simple game rules, he understands that they must confirm everything properly, including combat readiness. As they continue forward, Otonoha suddenly senses a presence nearby. This immediately shifts the group into alert mode. Because the situation is unclear, they prepare for the possibility of danger. However, when they observe carefully from hiding, they discover that the presence belongs to a goblin child, gathering something from the ground. This sight contradicts Fells's expectations. Based on his previous knowledge, goblins should appear more crude and aggressive, but this one behaves differently. Otonoha suggests eliminating it, treating it as a potential threat. However, Fells stops that idea immediately. Since it is only a child and shows no hostile intent, he decides that attacking is unnecessary. His decision reflects a shift from game logic to real-world judgment. Instead of remaining hidden, he steps forward and calls out. His action startles the goblin child, which reacts by trying to escape. Because of its panic, it runs without direction and crashes into a tree, falling to the ground. This sudden accident forces Fells to act quickly. He approaches and checks on the child, realizing that the situation has already become risky. Since they are near a goblin settlement, any misunderstanding could escalate quickly. As expected, that concern turns into reality. Another goblin appears from the trees, reacting to the situation with hostility. Fells immediately understands that the situation has shifted into a dangerous phase. The goblin raises its weapon and demands that he move away from the child, clearly treating him as a threat. Reincarnated reacts instantly by stepping in front of Fells and raising her shield. Even though she prepares to defend, she holds back from attacking because his earlier order still stands. This moment shows the discipline within the group, as they follow his command even under pressure. At the same time, the goblin calls out loudly, signaling for support. That action confirms Fells' concern about reinforcements. The ground soon begins to shake, which signals the arrival of something larger. Within moments, a massive goblin emerges, changing the situation completely. The encounter shifts from a small misunderstanding into a serious confrontation, forcing Fells to prepare for what comes next. The goblin child remains unconscious on the ground, which keeps the tension in place. In front of it, the goblin stands silently, creating a heavy atmosphere. Fells studies the situation and quickly notices the massive figure among them. Its size feels far beyond what he expects from a normal goblin, which makes him question whether it is even the same species. That confusion begins to slow his thinking, but he forces himself to refocus, since the situation is already dangerous. Before he can act, the giant goblin lifts a huge rock from the ground and raises it high. This action makes the hostility clear, and Fells immediately understands that they are being treated as enemies. The rock is thrown toward them, but as it flies, he realizes something unexpected. The attack is not aimed to hit directly, which suggests it is meant as a warning rather than an attempt to kill. At the same time, the goblin who called the giant moves toward the fallen child, showing concern instead of aggression. The giant then orders them to leave, reinforcing that their priority is protection, not immediate combat. Reincarnated reacts to the threat and prepares to eliminate them, but Fells stops her. Since he now understands the situation better, he concludes that this is not a fight they need to start. Because of that, he gives a clear instruction to hold position no matter what. Then he attempts to communicate, asking the goblins to listen. However, the response remains hostile as they continue to demand that he leave. This forces him to take a different approach. He raises fire in his hand and directs it upward instead of at them. The flames spread across the air, displaying overwhelming power without causing harm. This action changes the atmosphere instantly. By showing strength without attacking, he proves that he is capable of far more than simple threats. The goblins react with shock, and the giant finally agrees to listen. Others hesitate, but the leader makes the decision to proceed with dialogue. He explains that someone with such power would not act without reason, and he also notices that the child shows no serious injuries. This observation helps ease the tension. Fells feels relief as the situation shifts toward understanding instead of conflict. He realizes that the leader is calm and capable of reasoning, which gives him a chance to resolve things peacefully. At the same time, he acknowledges that his earlier practice with magic played a crucial role, since using too much force could have made things worse. He then explains that the incident with the child is a misunderstanding and offers an apology for how the situation escalated. His approach surprises Camilla, but it helps stabilize the interaction. Since the tension decreases, he expresses gratitude for their willingness to listen and suggests moving to another place for proper discussion. The goblin leader accepts this and offers to guide them to their village. As they arrive, Fells immediately notices that the place does not match his expectations. The structure in front of him appears far more developed than what he imagined, which signals that there is still much he does not understand about this world.
Here I am.